Hello there, Happy New Year to you, and you're very welcome along to the very first Off the Ball AM of 2018. You used to saying 2018 yet?
Yeah, 100%. I've had 48 hours, I've been saying it every single second.
Yeah.
Just into a mirror, 2018, 2018, 2018.
2017.
I'm ready.
Yeah. That's Owen, I'm Jar. You're very welcome along. As ever, if you want to get in touch with us, you can tweet us at Off the Ball, or you can just leave comments on whatever platform you're listening to or watching this. Remember, you can listen to an audio-only stream of this on offtheball.com. We have a very busy show for you today. Andy Dunne is going to talk to us about the rugby. The interprovincials are in mid-flow at the moment, and loads of talking points, sendings off, difficulty for Les Kiss at Ulster, a bit of a redemption story from them, but only after that sending off against Munster. Leinster look pretty sweet at the moment with loads of strength and depth, so we'll talk about that. José Mourinho has gone mental, talking about Paul Scholes. We'll talk about that with Gary Breen around about 8:30, and also talk about the Virgil van Dijk transfer, the first big one proper of the January transfer window. And I guess we've got to start with the drama at the darts. I mean, I haven't changed my mind about the darts ultimately being shit, but I understand why people like it now.
Well, what do you mean you still maintain that it's shit, but you understand that people like it?
It's just, you know.
There's surely an acceptance that some part of it is good.
Well,
if you can understand that people like it.
I mean, it's ludicrous. There's a guy who was an amateur this time last year who's now the best player in the world. He goes from actually not being able to do this thing a year ago to like suddenly spending enough time down the pub.
Well, that's the thing. He's not the best player in the world. He's won the World Championships, which makes these things special. I mean...
Okay, what's the point of a World Championships if you're not the best player in the world?
Well, the best player in the world is still probably Michael van Gerwen. And beating him in that unbelievable semi-final, which was one of the sporting matches of the year. I'm sorry, it was one of the best like, you're laughing. You're laughing at the idea that darts could possibly be reckoned with as one of the best sporting events of the year. But that semi-final with Michael van Gerwen was absolutely barnstorming. It was one of the best things I've seen. Like, I can remember in the middle of it, actually, okay, now I'm a big fan of the darts, but Wayne Mardle just kind of lost his shit entirely and was like, this is why darts is the greatest sport in the world. I'm like, I wouldn't go that far, Wayne, to be quite honest with you, but still...
You're pretty close to it.
Pretty close to it. I'm like, this is amazing.
If you were getting paid by Sky to do this now, everybody would be a little bit suspicious. But it's not, like, I mean, it's not a sport. It isn't. It's fine, and I understand people appreciate
Why
games.
isn't it a sport?
Well, like, is chess a sport?
No, because that's different. There is a physical skill which determines the outcome. That's what darts is. A physical skill doesn't determine the outcome of chess. A mental skill does. Okay,
you love darts. It's great. Some guy who was an amateur a year ago is suddenly a world champion. It's a remarkable rags to riches story, I believe they call it.
Kind of, but like...
I suggest, though, that like...
It's not as if he just started playing darts 12 months ago.
Well, there was him and one of his mates holding up they won £6 last year at some amateur thing.
£6 is £6.
It is. He won 400 grand for winning this.
And let's not forget that the golfing class between whatever he was playing in 12 months ago and the PDC World Darts Championship is a completely different beast altogether. £400,000 he won last night as a result of winning the World Championships.
I mean, who cares that there's a second one? What's the difference?
Yeah, to be fair...
Do they have like a bigger bullseye or something? It's like...
Maybe, or who knows. Like, the joke's just going to keep on coming here against my favourite game / sport. But there is this idea that, you know, darts is a great sport, but really it is the PDC World Darts Championship, which is the be-all and end-all. To a certain extent, the Premier League, which has got a big overhaul in the last 24 hours, is a big one as well. But outside of that, as you mentioned yourself, if you're at the lower echelons of the sport, you really would want to have a trade like being an electrician, like Rob Cross was 12 months ago. Hence
all the headlines that he turned the power off. Way.
Yeah, really good stuff there, actually. I enjoyed each and every one of them.
Yeah, it's in every paper. So Phil the Power Taylor, one of the most reviled people in world sport, according to my according to my Twitter feed anyway, there was a lot of people absolutely delighted that he was getting hammered last night.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was so happy. It made it even better just to see him getting absolutely crushed. And we were so close to having a perfect replication of Germany-Brazil in the 2014 World Cup, except he got that second set, so it ended up being 7-2 as opposed to 7-1. But the presentation was one of the most bizarre things that has ever occurred on actual television. It was so strange. It wasn't even a matter of cutting to Phil Taylor doing his kind of farewell speech and then cutting to Cross with the trophy. There was actually one shot where both things were happening in unison, where Cross was parading around the front with the trophy and Phil Taylor is being interviewed about his great career in the background. And then Cross, of course, gives him the opportunity to lift the trophy with him. Coldplay starts playing, and Phil Taylor starts miming the words to Coldplay and like getting the crowd going.
Song.
Viva la Vida. Like it was kind of like going to a birthday party, and a guy whose birthday it was last week shows up and was like, "My birthday party was great. Why are you celebrating this birthday party when mine was just 7 days ago? Come on and celebrate me." It was absolutely extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. And to be honest with you, when it comes to Phil Taylor, we all kind of know the man he is and stuff, but it really is kind of a matter of good riddance, isn't it? It's like...
He's a horrible human being.
Kind of. Well, not kind of, but very much so. But I did like, just on the last point of that, the interactions with the crowds, like walking up to the stage, signing a few autographs, taking a few selfies. He's like, "I am the man of the people. I am the misunderstood Phil Taylor." And then just the absolute nonsense after he'd conceded a set or if he missed a double, just kind of the eyes into heaven and kind of eyeballing Cross. Like after he missed that 9-darter, missed the double 12 on the wire for the 9-darter, goes up to Cross and is like, "I'm watching you, I'm going to track you down." Then he misses 3 darts at the 12. I think he goes over to whatever the 6. And then Cross wins the leg and wins the set, which was an incredible turnaround. That was the highlight of the sporting year in 2018. Even at the end of December, I'm going to still say that was the highlight of the year.
Can we clip that so that Owen remembers that he's promised that nothing good is going to happen between now and the end of 2018 that will in any way circumvent or trump what happened. Here's just a little clip of what you missed.
Back in the World Championship final, and is that fairy tale finale still on the cards?
Oh,
charming.
You might have missed it. It was like a little kind of, I'm going to give the finger, but it's going to be here, so you can't really see it.
Yeah. But who was he referring to there? Like, I mean, it could be one of his mates. Yeah. It could have just been one of his mates, you know.
Dele Alli style.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, wasn't that Dele Alli's experience?
Yeah.
Well, clearly, I would be very surprised if it was one of his mates, because I think Phil Taylor has this remarkable disdain where he has this big, broad grin where inside he's like, "I hate you. I hate everything you stand for. You like just everything."
You're well practiced at that, Owen.
Just
that all came a little bit naturally.
The big friendly smile, and really inside he's seething with life.
You're off the ball's very own Phil the Power. Right, let's move on and talk a little bit about José Mourinho. We'll get to the newspaper stories in a moment, but the big story across all of the newspapers is the fact that José Mourinho has decided that Paul Scholes' criticism of Paul Pogba was unwarranted. The rock star critique of Scholes went too far. So Mourinho unleashed on him, not in the post-match video TV interview that he does. It was afterwards with the main press conference, where he talked about how Scholes was jealous of the money that Paul Pogba has made. He talked about the fact that Scholes and Neville and the other Manchester United former greats actually just want to be part of the club, but he can't do anything about that. It's got nothing to do with him. He also just decided that this level of criticism that comes from Scholes is fairly typical. He doesn't critique, he just offers, he doesn't analyse, he just offers criticism. I was like, Jesus, maybe he's got a point here. Scholes is a fairly miserable git. So then I went back and watched the actual stuff, because, I mean, let's face it, not much of BT's analysis gets watched over Christmas. And it was one of the most even-handed pieces of analysis and reaction that I've ever seen from Paul Scholes. It was like, this guy, actually they're not playing him in his best position, they're not getting the most out of him. There, you can have a look at it there. Oh, that was the other one, yeah. If Paul one day decides to be a manager, I wish that he can be 25% as successful as myself. 50% of that is 12.5 silverware. What's the half trophy, I wonder? What half trophy is he counting there? Is it
Unity
like
Shield?
Yeah, or like the
which he's definitely counting as a full trophy in the original maths.
25% is around 6. If he's 25%, he'll be quite happy.
Yeah, it's probably right.
It's not Paul's fault, Pogba's fault, that he's made more money than Scholes.
But, like, you mentioned that there, Paul Scholes was almost bang on the money. He kind of points out that Paul Pogba is not playing as well as he was playing for Juventus because of his position. Lo and behold, they play another man in midfield. They bring in Herrera into the team. Suddenly they've got Herrera and Matic sitting behind Pogba. And lo and behold, we have Paul Pogba that played at Juventus, now playing for Manchester United. Granted, that was only over a 90-minute period. But José's getting on his high horse for the exact same point that Paul Scholes made. It's almost as if he was indeed listening to Paul Scholes and was like, that's a very good idea, Mr. Scholes. I'm going to push Pogba a little bit forward with a little bit more protection.
Scholes made the point that there's no way that Pogba can actually control a game. At Juventus, when he was playing really well, he had Andrea Pirlo right beside him, whose job it was to control the pace of the game, and then he would just bomb about the place, make tackles, create chances and score goals, which is ultimately what he thinks he should be doing for Manchester United, as opposed to controlling the game, which I guess is the whole point John Giles always makes about him not being a midfielder. It's interesting that Mourinho decided after a victory, like a pretty good victory, to come out and attack Scholes, and suddenly everybody's forgotten about the fact that he's a complete hypocrite about the Virgil van Dijk transfer fee and the bitching and whining about not having enough money when everybody went and did the maths. I was like, you had loads of money, what are you talking about?
Yeah. This is peak deflection, Jose, isn't it? I don't think I've ever recalled a time in his career where it's just like hit after hit after hit. Every single match he's coming out with something, and they've all been belters, in fairness to him.
I was just thinking, my New Year's resolution is not to give out about this stuff anymore, it's just to enjoy it. It's like, we're not going to have it for very long. It's going to, like, this burns itself out. Like, is he still there at this day next year?
No, this is, and Gilesy was talking about it on the show last week, this whole trajectory of Mourinho, you know, second year high, third and fourth year low. The third and fourth year lows have just been bumped forward to the second year, and it's either going to be early next season or by the end of the season where we reach the end of the tether. Like, the thing that is saving them is that they do have now a bunch of players who are finding a bit of form altogether. Like, you look at Jesse Lingard, who I previously thought as a problem because he was playing so well, because if Jesse Lingard is your best player, you're in trouble. But now I'm starting to reevaluate that theory quite substantially, and I'm starting to think that Jesse Lingard
might have a future
is on the route to becoming an absolute star for this club.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring you through the newspaper headlines. I mean, mostly we've kind of spoiled the fact that it's Jose Mourinho on most of the back pages here today. So where are we going to start?
Yeah, we'll start with the Times Ireland edition. Mourinho scolds Scholes is the headline they go for. They've also got a picture of Little there as he went over for Ulster against Munster yesterday in that fantastic come from behind win when they were 17-0 down. Leavy Fano is saviour for Kiss and Co. reads the headline for that story on the back of the Times Ireland edition.
So the Herald is Jose's jibe at Scholes. United boss defends Pogba after criticism with more money. The money thing is like, footballers get very annoyed about that. They all pretend they don't. No, it's grand that, you know, in my day we got like buttons compared to what these mediocre players, as they would see them. And like Paul Scholes obviously earned, I don't know, 35, 40, 45 million during his time. Has Pogba already earned more than that? I mean, probably obviously he will at some point.
But the endorsements that Pogba is making probably outweigh Scholes' earnings alone.
He might have made it 1 year.
Yeah, probably has. They're leading with it everywhere, really, on the back pages today. On the back of the Irish Daily Star, it's Jose's Scholes rant. Reds boss jumps to Pogba's defence. You can see a picture of the three parties involved there. You've also got a picture of Cross and Taylor. Taylor actually holding the trophy there pretty much on his own, and Cross kind of looking like an innocent bystander, like a fan meeting his hero, which kind of almost was last night.
No more Mr. Nice Guy, because, you know, he's been so nice all season so far, but Jose blasts Scholes and class of 92 legends as United hit back in style. So it's from a winning position, obviously. Maybe that's why he was waiting to do it. But the team played well. They beat Everton by 2-0 in that game last night. James McCarthy came on for Wayne Rooney, and the Everton crowd weren't best pleased with that. There were some cheers for Big Sam's decision making.
That Allardyce Tower is already crumbling right around you. The correct opinion prevails once again. on the back of the Sun, it's jealous. It's quite a simple headline there. Jose's amazing rant at United legend Scholes. You've also got the darts, you've got Mark Hughes, and you've got City thrill over Kevin De Bruyne's fitness as well on the back page there.
Shut it, Scholes is the headline on the Irish Daily Mail. United back on winning track, but Mourinho snaps at legend. They also have Johan van Graan not best pleased at Munster's indiscipline. A red card ultimately ended up turning the game at Ravenhill in Ulster's favour. Munster seemed to be cruising when they did have a man sent off, and ultimately both Van Graan and Les Kiss said the referee had no option but to brandish the red card. The rough and scarcely believable guide to a brave new world. It's Philip Lanigan's piece about the Dubs inside the paper there.
Let's show you the Irish Times Sports Tuesday. They're going with Manchester United. Martial and Lingard magic helped get year off to a better start for Mourinho. Martial and Lingard, the goal scorers there away to Everton. Hughes on the brink there as well as Stoker sunk again. He stormed out of his press conference yesterday in the wake of that 1-0 defeat to Newcastle United.
He's not a great manager. Could Tony Pulis be back?
Well, he's already gone into Middlesbrough, hasn't he?
Yeah,
so
of course, yeah.
He'll probably come back with Middlesbrough probably next season.
Yeah, all right. So I'm doing the Racing Post here, but I'm really only doing this for the tongue twister. Handling the pressure, hot favourites Tottenham should shackle shot shy Swansea at the Liberty. Did it?
There you go.
Not bad.
Bet he had a bit of butter ×2 right there, even tougher.
So I don't actually know what they were talking about there. Swansea and Spurs playing tonight. I mean, I don't know. Are Swansea as bad as... does that not have 0-0 draw written all over tonight?
Could do, which will be a good result for Swansea. I think this season has just been the epitome of the new manager bump. Everybody's just winning, and it's going to lead to the greatest relegation battle in the history of mankind.
There you go.
We're all looking forward to right now because the Premier League is done and dusted.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the greatest relegation battle of all time with Gary Breen a little bit later on. But I mean, it's not... For the first time in a long time, there's no complete turkey in there. There's no team who you can identify right now as... There's no team who's going to finish on 16 points or less.
That's for sure.
Fewer.
There was one, was it 3 seasons ago? Well, Villa were terrible. Sunderland were terrible last season. Villa were terrible the year before. The season before that, if I can recall, if you give me a few moments and dig those stats out, I think there was a very good relegation battle in recent memory. Clearly, they're that memorable that we just...
Classic 2013 relegation battle.
Yeah. On the front of the Irish Examiner Sports section, they're going with that Munster result yesterday, Reds on rack in Ravenhill. New Year nightmare as ill discipline leads to Munster Pro 14 collapse. We've also got P.M. O'Sullivan querying whether Michael Fennelly was 21st century hurling's finest midfielder.
Yeah, I think that he might be right. I think that Michael Fennelly probably... well, certainly if there's a team of the millennium up to this point, he's first name down at midfield. And I wonder if ultimately he ends up being considered one of the greatest midfielders of all time, because he had absolutely everything to his game. And there was a period of time, I mean, I guess for those teams you kind of need to do it for like a decade or so, but there was a 4 or 5 year stretch where his importance to the team couldn't really be overstated, and his qualities, I think, were the prototype qualities of what a midfielder should be. Also, I think the fact that when he came back last season, despite the fact he was playing on one leg, he was still absolutely sensational and managed to get that Kilkenny team beyond where they probably should have gone anyway. Right, Ulster flying high. This is Ulster's Robert Little soars over the line to round off his team's win against Munster. Mourinho blasts gold and rock star pundits for Pogba criticism, and it's mainly the rugby is the story there. That's a joint piece by David Kelly and Rory O'Connor, pointing out that Leinster now have a selection issue because you can only have 2 non-European players in your matchday squad for the Champions Cup, and James Lowe's been an absolute sensation so far. So what do? Gibson Park is probably the most likely to miss out if Lowe makes it, but then who's your sub-scrum half, and are you ready to put one of the kids in just yet?
Potentially Fardy could make way because of a bit more versatility in that position, but it's going to be a very interesting one for sure for the next Champions Cup fixture. I might just show you the back page of the Irish News. They're going with Tyrone and their quest to close the gap on the Dubs starting tonight for Tyrone. It is, of course,
McKenna Cup
season. Burn Cup. The Dubs are out tomorrow night. I actually have no idea what sort of team they're going to play. Presumably the under-21s again this season.
So yeah.
So I think it's fair enough if everybody just fields under-21 teams, because it's quite interesting to see the young players playing hard. But that is why we have an under-20s competition, you know. So I don't exactly see the point in any of this, to be quite honest. But it's good to get the season up and running quite early.
Kind of look at the Telegraph back page. United legends jealous of Pogba. Sorry, that's the front page of their sports section, obviously. And then the final farewell. Beaten Taylor bows out. A lot of poetry written about. I guess that's it. Like, I just don't like Phil Parra-Taylor, and he has been darts for the 40 years or however long he's been waddling up and down to the hockey. Since
Thatcher was Prime Minister was the line that was, trundled out every single time.
He just reminds me of the Thatcher.
He is quite Thatcherite.
Thatcher, yeah. Not looking after your family.
Well, there is that element of things. There is also the other very interesting element of yesterday was just kind of the blatant kind of disregard for the commercial element of the PDC World Darts Championship, where he just name dropped another bookmaker in the middle of his post-match interview. It's like, thank you for the millions I've earned from this competition. By the way, if this bookmaker had given me an option to cash out on myself last week, I would have taken it. And it's like, oh, come on, just have a little bit more class than that. I mean, give us something back here.
I mean, nothing befits him so much as the leaving of it, isn't that? Whatever the crappy line is that I'm trying to grow for there. So then, last one.
The front page of the Guardian sports section, it's Jesse Lingard. José sees red, Scholes under fire after United win.
Yeah, and then Klopp laughs off advert for Coutinho Barcelona shirts. This is some of the stuff that maybe you might have missed over the last couple of days. Coutinho has, of course, already signed for Barcelona, according to the good people at Nike. Or Nike, if I'm going to call it correctly here. So where the magic happens, Philip Coutinho is ready to light up Camp Nou. Get your 2017-2018 FC Barcelona kit with the magician's name on it. Like, all right, thanks, Nike. I mean, like...
Spoiling the surprise.
Well, like, it just leads to that kind of overwhelming sense that the deals around the best footballers in the world are so frequently actually not connected to what the needs of a club are. They're connected to what the needs of a sponsor are.
Yeah, who's actually calling the shots here?
Yeah, like the Pogba deal goes through and the money happens and everybody goes, oh, okay. But the kit is all part of it too.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was very interesting that Klopp said yesterday he's got absolutely no interest in the story. This is a pivotal story to your hopes of finishing in the top 4.
But it's not, because the story is the deal was done. Like, they spent the Van Dijk money in advance knowing the Coutinho money was coming, right? That's what all the Liverpool fans were like, oh, this is just the Coutinho money that's being spent. And they were 100% right about that. Nike know what the story is, Barcelona know what the story is, and Coutinho knows what the story is. It's a done deal.
Pretty much. Well, clearly that's going to happen. It was kind of like accidentally sending a tweet in advance. That was the confirmation right there, because you've alluded to it yourself. Nike referring to that is just as important as Barcelona or Liverpool referring to it, because of the importance of the commercial aspect of things, certainly when it comes to big money transfers. So if Nike are confirming it, that's good enough for me in terms of a club actually saying it's a done deal.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's done.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And then 2 other things we want to talk to you about. Mark O'Donovan was tweeting about the life of a rower.
Wow.
That's not Temple Bar, that's their gym. And that's a pizza of puke right there. It's some crack being a full-time athlete. This is on the 30th of December. Yeah, Larry Ryan from the Examiner correctly identified that it was porridge. That is like a full stomach's worth of stuff right there.
That's pretty disgusting, I'm not going to lie. Fair enough, but I didn't know the 29th of December was such a big night that it could cause such damage on the 30th of December.
He was like, not even.
This is New Year's Eve.
Yeah, so like definitely the GAA lads are making their sacrifices and, you know, only having a couple of nights out over Christmas, but the rowers and the athletes are absolutely hardcore. They don't really seem to have that much of an off season. Yeah,
and especially, okay, with the rowers, I suppose there's a couple of them involved with it, but certainly with a lot of those and with athletes as well, it's solo stuff. It's like, I can go out and have a few drinks, but there's going to be nobody in the dressing room tomorrow morning to, you know, kind of have a bump off and it's like, oh, that was good crack. Oh, sure, we'll puke the ring up today and we'll all be friends again afterwards and we'll get through this together. Doing it alone, like puking as a result of a night out is horrific in an athletic sense, but doing it alone is 10 times worse than anything else. Yeah. So a lot more respect for them.
That wasn't even as a result of a night out.
Oh, was it not? I just naturally assumed it was.
No, that was the whole point. It wasn't.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
They unconnected. It was just he pushed himself too far in the training session and was like, yeah.
But I suppose if you are having porridge, that would suggest that you're not really in a hungover state of mind, are you?
No.
It's not exactly.
You can't have porridge.
No, it will come straight up even without putting yourself on that rowing machine.
Plenty of times you feel like puking porridge and you're not hungover anyway.
Yeah, it's true.
It's so grim. Right, some of the other stuff that you might have missed over the last couple of days, because I know a lot of people aren't paying that much attention to the news agenda. We'll go here with the Kieran Sheehan story. So Kieran Sheehan has obviously called quits on his playing career in Aussie rules, and a lot of Cork fans in particular were hoping that maybe this would mean he's coming home. But Fintan O'Toole on the Journal on the 42 says that he's actually going to stay in Melbourne and take on a new role. He's hoping to take on a new role with the Australian Rules Players Union. Sheehan was class and was one of those players who gave Cork football fans hope every time they took the field, because he kind of had that, he could control a game in a way that very few individual players were capable of doing, and then injuries started to take their toll and then he went away, and so there's this kind of, it's like every time Wes or Andy Reid didn't play, it was like, that guy's an absolute genius. So that's where he is in Cork football fans' minds. And now at 27, they thought that maybe they're going to get him back, but he's sticking around in Australia. Yeah, the greatest what-if story. Like, thankfully for Cork football, they have 2010, because otherwise you think of that unbelievable batch of players, and there is a huge possibility if things had gone differently earlier in that championship, they would still be lingering, and we're like, that team could have won in All-Ireland, but they still have 2010. If Kildare had reached the final, they would have beaten them. Kildare would have beaten Cork, you think? I think so, yeah. Well, got to kick the ball over the bar. I think that Kildare would have beaten them that day. But if Cork hadn't done that, they would actually be the modern day equivalent of the Buffalo Bills in GAA terms. And the Buffalo Bills were one of the other big stories of the weekend. So how long is it? So what was their streak in not reaching the playoffs? Back to 1999. Back to 1999, which was the longest existing active streak in American sports. So no fan base had suffered as much as the Buffalo Bills. And this year they shot themselves in the foot. In the middle of the season, they pulled Tyrod Taylor and put this guy Nathan Peterman in as their quarterback for a game. Peterman had 5 interceptions in the first quarter, I think, or certainly the first quarter and a half. And then they lose that game, and it looks like they're going to go out from the playoffs by a game, only for Andy Dalton to step forward on a 4th and 12 and throw an absolutely insane pass to score a touchdown for the Bengals against the Ravens and knock the Ravens out of it, and then cue wild scenes in Buffalo. That's class.
And the journey could continue. Like, I think we've had this conversation before about the Bills, and just the fans are one of the most incredible fan bases ever. It's a proper blue-collar, working-class town, and even though they've had like 18 years of hurt, they still come back stronger and stronger every year, quite often cheering on their team to tank. And then suddenly, round one, you're coming up against Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think there's a real chance they actually win this thing on Sunday. I know they're on the road, and the Bills Mafia at home, and they're missing LaShawn McCoy, which is obviously a huge blow.
So their best player went down injured about 5 minutes into the game, and they still end up winning. He's got a bad ankle injury, so if he's not in, then they're going to get killed. But there's a chance that they might just dope him up. Inject him with legal painkillers to get him through that match.
There is no chance that happens. Doug Marrone, of course, is the other link we have there between Jacksonville and Buffalo, which is, you always get these interesting little tidbits of information around the playoffs. It's like the stars were always aligned. It's like if you leave somewhere in bad circumstances and to become a head coach somewhere else, you are definitely going to play your previous franchise in the playoffs at some point in the next 2 to 3 years. It's a rule.
Yeah, he quit. If anybody has any comments, by the way, just get them into us. You can tweet us here at Off The Ball, or you can always get us on facebook.com/Off The Ball. I'm going to bring you some stuff from the pay-per-view because it's relevant to the rugby, and we're going to be doing Rugby with Andy Dunne in just a second. Vincent Hogan and Marie Crowe were in with Dave McIntyre on Sunday's pay-per-view, talking about the review of the year. And Brendan Fanning had this really interesting piece in the Sunday Independent where he talked about his experience in St Anne's Park between Clontarf and Raheny, of watching a couple of underage matches in particular, and the difference between the rugby sidelines and the soccer sidelines. Here's Vincent Hogan brilliantly explaining it. Have a look.
In the Sunday Independent today, all the writers, including Marie, are picking their moment of the year. And Brendan Fanning, he does a brilliant left field thing. He goes to St Anne's Public Park. And I know Brendan coaches rugby himself. He's big into the whole idea of coaching kids. And he comes upon an under-11 match, and he hears coaches shouting, "Make only big hits," and this kind of stuff.
Take no prisoners.
Take no prisoners to under-11s. Like
they're actual lines of Brendan Hurd.
Under-11s.
Spread to under-11s.
You think about that, and he goes down to another part of St Anne's, and there's a soccer match going on. He reckons about under-11s as well, and the coaches are saying nothing. And the parents are saying nothing. There's no adult noises at all. The only sounds are the players talking to one another. And it's poetry to just imagine that. I mean, my daughter plays Gaelic football. I was at an under-13 final about a month ago. The game had to be actually stopped because one of the parents from the opposing team was making such a show of himself, and the referee had to stop the match. And you just think parenting can destroy children. It can destroy the beauty of sport, the enjoyment of sport. And that's why I loved what Brendan did there. He just stepped out of the bubble that we all do. What was our moment of the year? We all loved Joe Canning. We all loved James McLean. Well, this was different. And it was just one of those moments that you say, yeah, that ties in with what this Conor Stakelum story is about. It's about parents who actually are interested in their children, as distinct from some voyeuristic thrill of getting off on their success reflecting on them.
And allowing them to make that decision to, have their own dream, to follow that dream.
No pressure.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting line in that Brendan Fanning piece, and these two stories are linked, Vincent. You're absolutely spot on in that regard. It says it would be useful sometimes for all concerned, he means parents and coaches, coaching these underage teams, very young kids, boys and girls. It would be useful for all concerned to see a transcript of their comments and what bits they would edit if given the chance. Because some of the abuse that we hear being given to referees, to opposing children, opposing players, opposing coaches, you would imagine if you set that down in paper form to those parents the next day, a lot of them, not all of them, but certainly some of them would be appalled by their behaviour.
It's just the lack of adult self-awareness when a game starts. It's shocking. It's utterly shocking. Like, I mean, I think if you have nothing positive to say, don't say anything. Just shut up.
Yeah.
But the only thing shouted at kids should be encouragement.
Yeah, great stuff from Vincent Hogan there. Andy Dunne, you're a coach. Only the big hits. Is that what you'd be telling the kids if you were ever coaching kids?
Well, no, I'd fully agree with Vincent's sentiments. I mean, the nicest part of what he said there on Brendan's article was the crossover from such loudness and verbose parents on the sideline to go and watch the soccer and the quietness. I think there's a huge element of overcoaching in modern sport as it is. I think the beauty in sport is allowing people make decisions on the field and to be creative, and it starts at a young age. What I do see maybe is a really well-oiled machine at mini rugby level within clubs, maybe 500 kids on a Sunday morning. There's about 2,000 cons and about 1,000 parents. The 500 kids is the best part of that. Maybe there's a little bit of overcoaching, overtraining. People aren't allowed, or young kids even aren't allowed to make decisions for themselves and make mistakes and learn as they go. And that's one of the parts of what Brendan was getting at that I thought really hit home. We
were talking a little bit about this recently. There was just an interesting Twitter interaction about Nemo Rangers, the Cork club, kind of making a bit of a comeback, and how they hadn't been great at underage level, and yet suddenly they'd had a bunch of players come through, and somebody corrected them and said, actually, they're not trying to win every match at underage. They're trying to convince players to be skillful and have time on the ball. And somebody else made the point that this is fairly similar to Crossmaglen. So their point is, we want players to remain part of our club forever because we're an organisation that thrives on having adult members who are still willing to be part of it, and that you don't get that if you make every team and every match at underage level about winning and only give the first 15 the full 80 minutes in rugby or 60 minutes in underage GAA, as it would be, so that actually everybody gets games. And you don't win all the trophies at underage level because you're bringing up like players who aren't the best players, who clearly are not as good as somebody else, and who probably don't deserve to play if it's purely on a meritocratic basis. But actually, they stay with the club, they stay with the sport, they love the sport, and some of them are late bloomers, and you know what, who cares?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the Ajax Academy in the 70s, Barcelona, the Belgian soccer system in the last couple of years that has produced such great footballers, it wasn't based on results. Their entire academy structures and setups were based on the skill development and how you progressed on from one skill to the next. I heard an interesting comment in the Burnley-Liverpool game yesterday that Liverpool were hampered by the fact Joe Gomez couldn't use his left foot for the entire game. And you wonder, how can a guy get to that level playing football and only be able to use one foot? It's quite amazing to me.
There's a certain element of prestige, though, about underage competitions, particularly in Gaelic games, isn't there? And I know they've made steps at under 12 level to actually get rid of competitive GAA at that level, so it's just like go games, whatever they're called, just for the enjoyment of it. Like, when you mentioned the academies there, one thing that strikes out to me there is that those academies and winning competitions against other academies isn't that prestigious, and that getting onto the first team is the real prestige.
Well, I think there's a balance between, everybody's a winner and everybody gets a medal. I don't think that's the route to go either. I think a kid needs to learn how to lose and how to win, but it's not at the expense of skill development. And I think one of the kind of shining lights of example in this is actually the underage Senior Cup rugby in Leinster, where it's a knockout competition with a lot at stake, and kids and parents and coaches are in a 6-year cycle. But across the board, the games are televised and the coaches choose to be very progressive, very positive and attack-minded, and players keep the ball in hand a lot in those games, despite the cup tournament being run from January through to March.
I'm always conflicted about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely part of me that thinks it's far too much and the pressure is far too much, and then you look at the job that it does for the Leinster Academy, where, you know, Max Deegan, this is his first full year as a professional and he's clearly battle hardened and ready for it, and that's a combination of coming through the school system and then actually just having that pathway. So it's really important as a pathway for it, but it does seem like there's far too much pressure.
There is, and I see it as a club coach in that what seems to be coming out of school systems at the moment is either A, the finished article, or B, I never want to see a rugby ball again.
Yeah.
So at a club level, and we're coaching amateur guys at age 18 and 19, and there's guys coming to us six months out of school saying, I need a break from the game.
Yeah.
And it's quite a shock to hear a 19-year-old say that. But when you put it in context, it's not that much of a shock when he's had full-time training for the last 4 years every day. And
full-time training, a strength and conditioning coach,
absolutely,
like a skills coach, and probably a head coach in some cases.
But like you said, it is a conflicting issue, and I can understand why you look at it that way. But the flip side is it's an element of survival of the fittest, because those who are actually coming through are, you know,
sensational.
Yeah, like, and if you look at the strength and depth across, particularly Leinster as the best example, but it is permeating through at Munster level as well. Probably less so up in Ulster and Connacht, but it's certainly having an effect on our professional rugby performances.
So part of me then thinks that actually feeds the parents, that the parents are like, okay, so little Johnny has a chance of making millions now. You know, the next bunch of rugby professionals probably will end up making millions if they reach the absolute top tier. And that's the thing that's like, oh, you know, the Tiger parenting that made the Williams kids and a lot of those tennis kids and Tiger Woods and a lot of those golf kids basically. Most of them probably would think, actually, I wanted that. So in retrospect, I was glad that I had some element of the Tiger parenting, and that's what those idiots on the sideline, not that I'm justifying it, but that's what's going on in their heads, I think.
Yeah, but that's...
Little Johnny just needs that little push and he'll fulfil his potential. Yeah,
well, it's again, it goes back to what Brendan saw in St. Anne's Park. He saw a mix, he saw good parenting, he saw bad parenting. It's probably going to be the case on every single sideline in every individual game. Yeah. I think you got to take the good with the bad. There are plenty of parents who've got lots of, nous and smartness about how to raise the child in the most practical way too in terms of sport. But I would say, from a rugby point of view, it's becoming such a physical game, so challenging, that if only the parents want the child to get through, it ain't going to happen, because it requires a hell of a lot of drive to be successful in rugby, just purely from a physical point of view and from a will to even be present on the field at the moment.
Let's move on, because we definitely have to talk about the various actual matches over the Christmas break. And at the end of it, Leinster must be feeling pretty good about life, the strength and depth that they have, the quality of play, their ability to grind out when they need to, their ability to dig in defensively when they need to, and a smattering of new talent effectively in James Lowe and Deegan coming through, and just proving that even their signings are really good and the players coming through from the academy are sensational.
Yeah, there's so much right about what they're doing at the moment. One area that you mentioned very quickly there in passing was their style of play. I think their style of play is feeding so much of their success. Their recruitment was excellent. If they go for a marquee name, they brought in a guy like James Lowe, who's hit the ground running and been sensational in his first 4 or 5 games. However, they've got that whole academy crew coming through. They're rotating their team well, which is risky 6 months ago, but when that team comes through and wins an important game away from home, they've arrived, and then suddenly you've competition for places. So they've cultivated a level of competition, but their style of play is what I would go back to. It's probably been the most expressive I've seen an Irish team play in attack in the last 8 years. Maybe you're going back to maybe 6 years ago when Schmidt was coaching Leinster and they won a Heineken Cup back to back. That quality of attack, which is so hard to get right, is something that Leinster are doing brilliantly well.
Just on that, James, the expressive style of play, just a very basic kind of skills thing watching the game yesterday. Is there anything Connacht can do to stop James Lowe offloading the ball at every single opportunity? Is there something that he needs to do better in terms of tackling, just to get him to ground quicker, or is he just too good and he's unstoppable in that regard?
Well, it's always there's always scope to stop somebody in that situation, but it probably takes 2 defenders, and that's the magic of having someone who can pass out the tackle. You know, from an attacking philosophical point of view, this goes back as far as the 70s. You got Carwyn James, who was like the godfather of attacking rugby, coach to the 71 Lions down in New Zealand. And as it happened, Carwyn James ended up in Italy in the late 70s, and he was accompanied by Dick Greenwood, who wrote one of the great attacking rugby books, who's Will Greenwood's father. Brian Ashton was down in the north of Italy playing at the time, and Wayne Smith, who's coached the All Blacks
skills coach. Yeah.
Now, of that group of people, you've got a guy who won a Lions tour back-to-back away from down in New Zealand and South Africa. You've got Brian Ashton, who coached one of the great English sides in the 03 World Cup. You've got Wayne Smith, who's got 2 World Cups. You've got Dick Greenwood, whose son obviously went on. They were like the enlightened. That was a crazy gathering of like minds in one area. Happened to be in the north of Italy in the late 70s, and what they suggested about attack back then was that the only way to be a real force in attacking rugby is to learn to pass out of the tackle. And that is gone from the late 70s, and what happens is it comes in waves and in trends, and it's coming back into trend now, and you're seeing teams like Leinster. Connacht won the Pro 14 2 years ago doing the exact same. The Lions New Zealand series this summer saw probably some of the great tries scored at a highest level of rugby. Sean O'Brien's try coming from deep was all offload based, and New Zealand play that game all the time. They scored countless tries in
Ireland
ain't doing it. No, Ireland are the one side at the moment. Maybe England aren't doing it either. In fact, I think Ireland aren't doing it for, I'm not sure what reason. Maybe it's, I think I've felt at times it's probably down to maybe you go back to that analogy to the parents, it's win at all costs in the Six Nations, and I think that's probably been something that's been pushed upon Joe Schmidt, because he can clearly coach sides that play that way, because he did it with Leinster. However, his Irish sides are not doing it, and they're not, doesn't look like they're trying to do. When you look at James Lowe, he does everything in his power to get the ball out of the tackle without falling on the floor and setting up a ruck. And what it promotes then is support runners around him. You saw Johnny Sexton, Luke McGrath sprinting towards him as he was getting tackled, as opposed to players running in the opposite direction. What you often see when a guy gets tackled, people turn their back because they're repositioning to set up the next phase. When James Lowe carries it, you've got a swarm of people running towards him where the space is around him, and it promotes, it's great to watch, and it promotes try scoring rugby.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned Jordan Larmour's amazing try, which was immediately doing the highlight reels. Now, every time he does something like this, and it seems to be every game he plays in, the calls for him to get like capped. So there's defensive issues. Everybody says there's defensive issues, but how do you speed up the defensive learning? Do you stick him in an international game and go, okay, you just conceded a couple of tries there, and that's what happens in international, or do you try and teach them? Slowly coach that into him?
I certainly would be the school of thought is you throw him straight in, because he's good enough. He can do things that most guys can't do, and that's going back, you could go back 20 years maybe in Irish rugby at the highest level and think of someone who can do that in a Leinster-Munster game. He can learn defensively how to improve probably quickly under pressure, and I think you got to allow him make a mistake or two at the highest level and keep him there. I wouldn't say he deserves to just be without doubt, just put him in and start regularly.
No, but
he needs a couple of international games to grow his confidence. I think the worst thing we could possibly do with a guy like that now is start chipping away at him and say, look, okay, that was excellent, but it'd be a very Irish thing to try and sit in him and say, no.
Yeah, they can kick the ball off your head there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be a shame, because a player like that could lose confidence quickly. I think he needs to be wrapped up, managed, and for me the best way to do it is just allow him to go out and make a few mistakes. Tell him before a big game, look, you're allowed to go out and make one or two. Yeah. You'd find in 2 to 3 games he wouldn't be making them.
But surely he's not going to get the big game experience for Leinster even.
No, I don't believe it's going to happen. Yeah, I'm speaking out of turn from my point of view, what I do, but I'm not the coaches.
But you would expect, even at his stage of development, when people like yourself speak so highly of him, it's got to be this season, it's got to be next season, where he's getting regular game time in the big European nights for Leinster. Whereas you look how good James Lowe is, it's probably going to be McFadden on the other wing, just for that conservative nature. Carney's probably going to be at 15, so where does Larmour fit into things in a short-term basis? It's hard to see.
I think it fits into how you're trying to play the game and what's your overall philosophy in attack. If you look at Argentina in the last World Cup, they destroyed us, albeit we lost 5 players in that crucial game. But Argentina had a 4-year cycle prior to the last World Cup where they shipped 70-odd points down in South Africa, trying to learn how to play this game, to offload out of the tackle, to attack space. And they got hockeyed for about a year and a half until they became better at it. And lo and behold, they made a World Cup semi-final, which we've never done. So at some point, you've got to trade off what's the value of winning by 2 points in the odd Six Nations game as opposed to shipping 10 to 15, blooding young players who are capable of playing a certain way. I mean, I would go back to those enlightened 4 or 5 coaches. They were like the attacking Jedis of rugby, and they still seem to be the voice of what is the appropriate and most creative way to attack. And this is going on 30 years. And what happens is people abide by it in cycles.
Yeah, you know? And somebody comes along and beats it, and then
someone beats it, and then you get your Donegal kind of conservative style of defensive play, and then someone else finds out a way to attack and beat it again. But invariably, the best way to beat a good defence is to pass out of the tackle in the most simplistic form.
I mean, I think Leinster fans are right to be incredibly excited about a potential back three in about 2.5 years' time of Carberry at 15, Larmour on one wing and Lowe on the other. Like, they're going to be sensational.
Yeah.
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it's already brilliant.
Yeah.
But like...
Well, it's a pretty exciting prospect. I still think the way Leinster play at the moment in time, when perhaps when Johnny Sexton retires, or when, you know, I still think Carberry's a 10, and I think he ought to be deployed there based on the way Lancaster sets up his team in attack. They're running balls from their own 22. They're looking to pass out of the tackle across the field, not just in James Lowe's position. So I think someone like Carberry could add huge value in a first receiver role in attack there as well. But yeah, I mean, if you add in Gary Ringrose and players like this, Robbie Henshaw, and that's without mentioning Sexton, McGrath. I think Leinster have an area of concern around 9 actually. Luke is their standout number 1 player. Their backup 9 is an issue at the moment. So
in James Gibson Park, you know.
Certainly, yeah. I think he was quite poor in the Munster game. I actually think he brought Munster back into that match with wayward kicking, but I think that's one area where they lack strength and depth at the moment.
Let's talk a bit about the scrum half situation actually, because a couple of interesting tweets from Gavin Cummesky during the Ulster-Munster game. He was making the point that this is the current pecking order. Murray's number 1, clearly McGrath's number 2, and then he's got Marmion and Cooney number 3. That's kind of pre-kickoff, and then all of a sudden Cooney puts in another brilliant performance, and it's like, actually, this guy is tearing up trees.
Well, I think the real issue there is actually looking at how John Cooney can place kick. He's got a lovely kicking style, and regardless of that, he's pretty effective with it too. We don't really have a backup kicker to Johnny Sexton at the moment, which is pretty shocking.
It's Conor Murray, really, isn't it?
Yeah. But Conor Murray does not place kick in competitive rugby. So if we, you know, God forbid, Johnny takes an injury either in the Six Nations or in a World Cup, 18 months away, like, who the hell is going to place kick? It's pretty central to any team. You know, I think we probably need to identify somebody, and it's very hard to pick. I watched after the Autumn Internationals, Robbie Henshaw was out doing, you know, warm down with some of the players, and he was pinging kicks over for fun from the halfway line. Okay. That was after a game with zero pressure, but it struck me, and I went, well, why isn't he being asked to do it more regularly? Why isn't he being, maybe he is being asked to train in with it, but we've a serious lack of options in terms of place kicking there if you think you're starting 23.
If you're Robbie Henshaw, then you're definitely adding that to your game, because you're thinking, there's a bit of pressure here between, so it's me, Gary Ringrose and Bundy, and maybe Jared Payne if that ever happens again. But I'm like, oh, well, hang on a second, I can also do this. Like, I've got to be in the team.
I would have thought there's got to be 5 to 6 players out there, you know, who are exactly identifying that point and saying, how do I differentiate myself for Joe? And if I can knock over 8 out of 10 place kicks, or 7 out of 10 even, we take that pressure, we'd take it.
Yeah.
James Hart is down, and it's an interesting one. He's down in Munster. He's 3rd choice. They bought him. I mean, they went and got him from Racing Club. He's Irish. born and bred, Irish qualified. And the whole reason they got him was like he was the 90% place kicker. He was one of the leading point scorers in the French top 14 for 2 seasons, and they've got him third choice. It's an interesting one behind Duncan Williams. So,
yeah. Maybe the hope is that he's going to beat out Duncan Williams eventually for that spot.
Maybe so, yeah.
Not a great night from Munster's perspective, but not as bad as it would have been if they'd lost that game without having a red card. It's always bad when your team suffers a red card and loses the game, but at least there's a reason for you losing the game. Mm-hmm. Is that a coach? Okay, look, this could have been a complete disaster.
Yeah, I think it's something. Ultimately, I think Van Graan will look at discipline as opposed to implosion. I mean, the team lost. There were 13 men from minute, I think, 58 to 68, and then there were 14 men for the last 22 minutes.
Yeah.
So, against any kind of side worth their salt at that level, you've got to think they're going to capitalise as the game drew on. They certainly did. Lealiafano in particular was smart and picked off where the space was very well. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought. I mean, Ulster would have done a fair bit of soul searching from the Connacht game, but Munster had a very successful pre-Christmas, beating Leicester back to back. I think discipline would be probably the smartest way to approach this, to avoid kind of mass hysteria down in Munster. They shot themselves.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit harsh to be nitpicking, especially after losing Sam Arnold's to the red card and stuff, but you kind of look at their attacking plan, and outside of that rolling maul, which is devastating, particularly against the weakness that Ulster have up front, like what exactly do they bring? If they need a plan B, it's kind of hard to see where they go.
Yeah, well, I think it's one area where they struggled. If you go back to the Munster-Leinster game, they had a very poor first half. They kind of fell into their pace by accident. They started to move the ball very quickly for 10 to 15 minutes, and suddenly it was 27-19. And ironically, Keatley's kicking game out of hand improved, beyond recognition during that period. It was like the natural part of his game was firstly running and distribution. His kicks were all very much on point during that period because the back three from Leinster were otherwise occupied. I think if you play a dull, static type of game and then try and emulate the likes of O'Gara by hitting 60-yard, one bounce into touch kicks, he was a bit of a one-off, in terms of guys who could do that. I think you're better off playing an attacking brand of rugby, engaging the back three, the backfield in the opposition, and then the kicks become easier. I think that's where Munster need to go in their attacking game, but at the moment they're falling between stools of maybe their tradition, their success and history, but a lot of that was borne out by an impeccably good kicker out of hand in Ronan O'Gara, which you don't get in every generation, and certainly not there in Irish rugby at the moment.
No, it turns out. One last point, from Connacht's perspective, they obviously needed something to happen for them over the Christmas period, and the big first win did happen for them. I don't know how much they take from another moral victory against Leinster, but clearly things are improving, and we needed to see signs of improvement. But getting that victory in Dublin would have been huge for them.
Yeah, I think the game in Dublin, I mean, I actually played on the last Leinster team to lose to Connacht.
I thought you were going to say you played in the Connacht team.
No, no, I was always on the wrong side of the result. But
in 03,
Connacht,
right?
02, Connacht beat Leinster in Donnybrook. I was playing for Leinster, so didn't play the following week, mind you. But the Connacht side, I think, surely, yeah. I mean, they would have been a huge step into 2018 to win yesterday. But I think if you'd asked them prior to Ulster and Leinster, a 44-point win, 44 points on the board rather against Ulster, and a very, very narrow defeat away to Leinster, I'm sure they would have taken it. Again, I would go back to, Kieran Keane, for example. He probably is the type of coach who's developing an attacking game that needs time. And it goes back to that Argentina example. Connacht looked rudderless at times for the start of the season, but you are actually going to look rudderless when you try and play this game.
Yeah.
It's until there's penny drop moments among the players and a bit of calibration and people start to read each other on the field that game really comes into itself. But it does require, a bit of softly from his employers and from his players and
the fans as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Andy, great stuff. Thanks very much. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Ger.
We'll let you get to work. Thanks very much for that. Now, we're going to bring you some Gary Breen goodness in just a moment. If anybody has any questions for Gary, now would be a great time to get them in at Off The Ball on Twitter or facebook.com/Off The Ball. So here's the footage of José Mourinho talking about Paul Scholes yesterday evening. We're going to talk about this right now.
I think the only thing Paul Scholes does is to criticize. I don't think he comments. I think he criticizes, which is a different thing. But you know, not every one of us has to be phenomenal like he was as a player. He was a phenomenal player. That doesn't mean that we all have to be phenomenal. Paul tries to do his best all the time, and sometimes he plays very well, sometimes he plays well, and sometimes he doesn't play so well. You know, it's not Paul's fault that he made much more money than Paul Scholes. It's not Paul Pogba's fault. It's just the way football is. But I think Scholes will be in the history like a phenomenal player, not as a pundit. So I prefer to look at him as a phenomenal player that gave so much to the club that I am proud to represent and to give my humble contribution every day. Every day I try to do my best. If Paul one day decides to be a manager, I wish that he can be 25% as successful as myself. Because 25%, so 50% is 12.5 silverware, 25% is around 6. If he's 25%, you'll be quite happy. But in my mind, Paul Scholes, phenomenal player, one of the best players I have ever seen playing in midfield, and he gave so much to my club that I only can thank him for that, because the prestige of this club is based on people like him.
Gary Breen, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, guys.
How do you think Paul Scholes is going to respond to the jibes about him being a little bit jealous of the money that Paul Pogba has earned? And, you know, if he's a quarter the manager that I am, well, then he'll be doing pretty well.
Yeah, listen, I have no doubt Paul Scholes is not struggling for a pound note or two. There's no doubt about that. But it's a strange thing to bring up, the money scenario. I think José Mourinho doesn't like criticism. I think the way he's worded that, he's very quick to acknowledge how highly thought of Paul Scholes is in Manchester United fans' views and the history of the club. But I think he's got his message across straight away, that he's telling Paul Scholes, you've never managed, so why are you commenting on that? And the issue he probably has is that he's talking about Paul Scholes being negative all the time. Well, at times this season, it has been frustrating to be a Manchester United supporter in terms of what's happening across the city. So you can understand the frustration there, but José Mourinho doesn't seem to be handling it particularly well.
Part of me, so I went back and watched exactly what Scholes had said, and you know, Scholes has actually developed a bit of a reputation as being quite negative, but also being quite straightforward. This wasn't particularly negative. This was just saying that Pogba was a better player at Juventus because he had Andrea Pirlo beside him, and actually he also seemed to be a little bit fitter at the time. Now there are some questions about whether or not Pogba has been living his life right off the field over the last year or so, but he's had some difficulties in his personal life, and that seems to have been one of the main reasons why there was a bit of distraction for him. I think that maybe Mourinho is pissed off because Paul Scholes is right.
Well, I'm sure Mourinho's frustrated by the fact that, and talking about fitness issues, the fact that Pogba got injured, and he was quite vocal about that he shouldn't have got injured, that he played a game when he had a little bit of a tight hamstring, and as a result, then he missed a big chunk and some vital games. But you're right, in terms of what Paul Scholes has said, I think what player isn't better having someone like Pirlo next to him? And certainly, when you think of Pogba playing for Juventus, it was in a 3, it was on that left-hand side. And for the first time, it seemed like he was playing that role yesterday, where he was just drifting to left-hand side of midfield, finding space and creating from there. And he looked back to his best. He was the one that made the difference in that second half. Certainly, Manchester United were finding it difficult to break him down. but that quality pass, that weighted pass in field there to Martial to get the opening goal, and then Manchester United just went on from there. But listen, the frustration obviously comes in terms of what Paul Scholes has said, but I think it's a accumulation of things in terms of the fact that what Pep Guardiola is doing at City, the frustrations that Mourinho has in trying to keep up with him. He's struggling. He's saying a comment every other week, it seems, in terms of the money, that he hasn't had enough money, which is a ridiculous statement. The fact that they've been unlucky, that the footballing gods are looking down on City. It never, ever seems to be Mourinho's fault as such. And when people do start questioning his ability as a manager, which in terms of what he's done over his career, you cannot question him. But if they're looking at him right now, and is he performing to stay with the likes of Guardiola, then he obviously is finding it difficult to answer questions about that in itself.
Do you think we've reached peak pundit at this point, Gary? Do you think that the cult of the pundit is just too large? Like, we've got José Mourinho here constantly wanting to leave a mark on anybody on television who says something about him. We look at Arsene Wenger even hitting out at Thierry Henry this week after he criticised the Arsenal players for not going to celebrate with Sanchez. And then suddenly after his comments, all the players go and celebrate with Sanchez after his goal against West Brom. So suddenly the pundit is just as important as anybody else inside the team or any comments from the staff. That literally, if you say it on BT Sport or you say it on Sky Sports, that is as much rocket fuel for these players to come back with hit back quotes, if you like. Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, it's the way that the supporters are getting a lot of their views in terms of listening to iconic players, certainly who are attributed to a particular club. So if Henry's talking about Arsenal, those supporters are going to listen. Paul Scholes, likewise, at Manchester United, and Carragher, these type of guys are opinionated. They've been very successful. And these managers are under a microscope now, like never before, in terms of iconic players, top players who are quite good in terms of breaking down the game, dissecting it and saying, listen, this is not quite right. They're not right all the time. And you have to, and you're quite right, Jer, to say about Paul Scholes. He says a lot of stuff just to create a little bit of a headline. It's incredible, really, because we couldn't get a word out of him while he was playing. But the managers don't like it. They don't like to be questioned. And I think their mindset also is, listen, it's all right saying this in a studio, but you come and do what we're doing. And that's something that they should do. I think any manager, if he's being criticised by the likes of Gary Neville now, can turn around and say, well, hold on, I don't remember England playing particularly well. I don't remember Valencia performing particularly well. So, and you can notice it with Gary Neville. He's toned it down a little bit. He's trying to be a bit more in terms of breaking down situations rather than just giving sweeping comments like the likes of Scholes and these other guys who haven't coached.
So is this classic Mourinho just getting back and distracting from the fact that maybe he made a bit of a boo-boo when he talked about the money? Because certainly the response when he did talk about the money was overwhelming. Everybody called him a hypocrite and started to point to the evidence and the facts, and basically he was talking nonsense. This week we're all talking about this, as opposed to the excellent performance, and also the fact that maybe Pogba did actually play in that role and he listened a little bit to what Scholes had said or responded to it. So this was about, like, actually, I'm right, I'm the boss. What's the motivation here, do you think?
Well, in terms of Pogba, I'm sure that he holds Paul Scholes in like high regard, being a young player coming through United, seeing what that guy was doing on the training field. So I'm sure if he does say something, and it's a positive criticism, I'm sure he will take it on board. But Mourinho is a manager, there's no doubt about that. And he always creates a siege mentality, doesn't he? I'm sure he's gone into that dressing room and said, listen, all these guys are criticising us, let's show them and stuff like that. But the frustration from Mourinho must be the fact that, and we've seen it from Manchester United over this Christmas period, they have actually dominated games, created chances. But the player that he normally has in his team, top goal scorers like a Drogba, those type of guys, a Ronaldo at Real Madrid, they just don't take their chances as much as they created. And when you look at the Southampton game, it just reminds you of last season where they just couldn't break down these teams and it cost them so many points. And I think that's where the real frustration is coming from Mourinho. But when you do listen to him, Jerry, and you listen, it kind of gets you down listening to him now, because when he is at his charming best, he's brilliant to listen to. But he just seems so dour at the moment, as if the whole world is against him. And it's not that way, because he has been successful in terms of coming into Manchester United last season. I think the belief was that the second season, United would be challenging a lot stronger than they have been. But they've just come up against an incredible team. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't help the fact that they're Manchester rivals. It doesn't help the fact that it's Guardiola, who always seems to be his main rival in terms of Mourinho not getting the credit he deserves, because he looks at Guardiola and what he's doing and the way he's doing it, and he just doesn't enjoy seeing the plaudits that he gets. We were just making the point a little bit earlier on, fast forward to New Year's Day next year, and I think it's 50-50 whether or not José Mourinho is still the Manchester United manager, especially if Man City start the season next year the way it looks like they're going to finish this year. Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think what would concern me, certainly, if you're a United fan who wants to keep Mourinho, is he keeps referencing PSG, the money that they've got. And Mourinho will look at that and think, listen, I want to be successful. He thinks he's turned up at an iconic club like Manchester United, but they don't have the financial muscle that they've had in previous years. They can't compete against those type of guys. So I think he will look at that scenario. I think he's caught in it in terms of saying, well, listen, come to me, make an offer, and we'll see how it goes. But I would agree with you guys. I wouldn't be convinced that he's going to be a long-term appointment at United. But everyone said that initially. But I think the main thought was that he would win trophies and then go. It doesn't seem that he'd be able to do that with the Manchester City's type of form.
Yeah, it's ironic really then when you look at Jesse Lingard in the middle of all of this, that suddenly there's a player within the ranks who's made this jump, as José referred to it as. He says some boys make the jump, some boys don't. Lingard has made that jump very visibly, and there's no question now after his form in November, December and into the start of the new year. What's that down to, Gary?
Probably a lot of belief from the player himself. He's took his opportunity, and that's a good thing for Mourinho, that someone like him has developed and kicked on, because everyone's looking at what Guardiola has done, not just in terms of the money that he's spent, but how he has improved the squad that he inherited. That, like the likes of De Bruyne, even Silva, Otamendi, they've gone to a completely different level. Every one of that squad has, to be perfectly honest. So I think it's good, because I think a lot of people will look at United and probably use it as a stick to beat Mourinho, to say, listen, he's not developing these players. They're not getting any better. Lukaku, as such, hasn't kicked on like you would expect him to, bearing in mind he's leading the line for Manchester United. So Lingard is certainly a plus for Mourinho, and he has to continue that.
Let's move on. I just want to play you a clip here of Pat Nevin talking about how he's getting a bit bored of the fact that everybody who comes up against Manchester City ends up playing really defensively against them. Have a look.
I'm a bit fed up with it. I'm really fed up with it. I was about 3 weeks ago, I don't know if you remember, Man City played against Huddersfield, and then Chelsea went up to Huddersfield as well, and I was at the game, and Huddersfield never made an effort to get out of their back line, very much like Newcastle. Watched Southampton doing the same recently as well. Watched Everton doing exactly the same. Liverpool managed to sneak away and get the penalty that day, but totally undeservedly, and that's coming from a blue. When I played, I managed to play just about 850 games in my career, and I can only ever remember two teams not making an attempt to attack, and that was San Marino and Luxembourg. Everybody else domestically had a go. And we were playing against good teams in those days. I mean, Liverpool were one of the best, if not the best, club team in Europe. You know what? Whether it was playing for Chelsea or Everton or whatever, we had a go. At some point, you certainly would never lined up in that way where you sat in the back line, you lumped it forward, and you waited for the next attack.
Even teams that were in the relegation zone, even teams that were 17th, 18th, 19th in the First Division table, when they were going away to Anfield, they wouldn't just sit back.
Do you know what? See teams in the third and fourth tiers of English football, they have a go. They have more of a go than that when it's a cup game. That's the way it is. That's the way British and stroke English football has always been. Now, you may have to defend for periods, but you will at some point have a go. We'll have the belief to break out now and again. It might only be with 3 or 4 or 5 players, but you will have it in your armoury to have a go, because, now and again it works for you. Now, if we get into the habit, and it is becoming a real habit, and I've not seen this in the British game, in the English game, really basically ever before. This is the worst, white flag I've ever seen from a group of teams. Now, just when I was getting very annoyed about it the other day there, suddenly 1 or 2 teams decided, well, we'll have a little bit of a go. Palace had a little bit of a go at Manchester City. West Brom had a little bit of a go at Arsenal. So maybe it's not all, nightmares and disasters, but Stoke City turning up at Chelsea and Mark Hughes saying, I understood his argument, it made a lot of sense. But even if you leave a lot of players out, don't bring all these other guys in and tell them not to attack.
Yeah, I think that's the key point there. The Stoke City example at the end is the perfect end of that. So Mark Hughes basically picks a B team and says, if it was still close at half time, I was going to bring on all the subs and get a bit more experience on in the second half, and I was saving the team for Newcastle, and then ultimately they end up losing both games. Like, it did feel for a while in the Premier League like even the bad teams had enough really good players on them in the squads that they could go to Chelsea and cause a bit of a trouble.
Yeah, listen, you talk about bad Premier League teams. I played in a couple of them myself, and you're right. you'd obviously be up against it in terms of the top teams, but you would go after them. Of course you would. You know, I remember for Coventry, we would have had the likes of Gary McAllister, Robbie Keane, and we beat Arsenal. They're a very good team at the time. But I think we beat United as well at home at Coventry when that might have been the year that they won the treble. So we went after them. And, you know, you quite often you're found wanting, but still it wasn't be a negative. But I agree with a lot with what Pat says there. And he's a purist, Pat. You have to remember that. He's about total football. And at times, I think the likes of Wenger, Guardiola, certainly Klopp to an extent last year when he was talking about playing against West Brom, couldn't understand why teams were playing certain ways against them. Well, you know, you have to have a reality check. The likes of Wenger always wants people to take Arsenal on at football. It doesn't work like that. Big Sam used to ruin him in the Premier League years with Bolton in terms of that physicality. So there is that. But you're right. I think the performance of Newcastle in that first half suggests that it's already putting up a good defensive performance. And Bournemouth had done it a couple of days earlier for half an hour. Really good. But anytime they won the ball and forced a turnover, they're looking to play Callum Wilson at pace down the channels and expose the fact that City's fullbacks have gone in advanced areas. Newcastle never looked like doing that. That was the problem. They just tried to stay in the game. But I would agree as well, what Stoke did recently at Chelsea, just that beggars belief, really. And his comments for an experienced manager to say, listen, we're just putting all our eggs in one basket for Newcastle. And I think the general consensus of football supporters were delighted to see them lose that game, because you can't give up a game like that. You have to put a challenge in. And they were 3-0 down after 20 minutes. And you have to argue that message came from the manager before those players even stepped on the pitch, that they literally were told, listen, we've got no chance here, so let's just get it over with. Let's get on the bus back home.
Because ultimately he's telling as well a bunch of players just to sit it out for the day, because we've seen West Brom put in an official complaint about the build-up of fixtures, but really when you talk to a lot of players, there's a certain sense of enjoyment, particularly after they've retired, and kind of a wistful remembrance of just a game after game after game around Christmas. Yeah. And essentially you're out there playing football, and essentially Mark Hughes is like, right, these guys are sick of this. This is the worst possible time for this to happen. And he's clearly waving the white flag on behalf of the players.
Yeah, well, listen, you're right there, and because I'm sick of listening to these players talking about they can't play. That's part of the challenge of the Premier League, is that you have certain games and you get yourself in physical condition that over the winter period, you're able to play the short amount of loads of games in a short amount of time. And that's the challenge. That's why it's so unique, the Premier League. And what you have is these sports scientists have grabbed hold of the football and they keep telling players, you can't do it. You can do it. Maybe you can't play, but it's an endurance-based league. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon as such, and that's one of the challenges. And when they keep saying that they can't do it, it's a nonsense. And I know they'll put the stats out, but they feel when I was coaching at Peterborough, even at that level, the sports science was coming in as if they invented the game. It is so frustrating.
Just going back to that Manchester City talking point a moment ago, is there something in that Crystal Palace performance that we can take and that other teams can take for the rest of the season, that you don't have to be gung-ho to create opportunities against Manchester City, but if you've got a good target man who can hold up the ball with two speedy wingers either side of him, you've got a very good chance of causing Manchester City some sort of problem. Of course, the resorting to the kicking is not something that people should be looking to, but, you know, teams are going to try it again, no doubt.
Yeah, well, even in terms of how that game developed, though, City had loads of chances, so it could quite comfortably be a 3-0, 4-0, but Palace stayed in the game. That's the difference. They managed not to concede a goal in the first half and then took it to the last 15 minutes, where any football game can go anyway then. But when you look at the way people say about adopting a negative attitude against Manchester City, Manchester United did. They didn't go toe-to-toe with them this season. They tried it last year and got mauled. And Tottenham are the only ones over the last couple of seasons, prior to this game where they played and got beaten 4-1, they took 10 points from 4 games from Manchester City with a high press. But all of a sudden now this season, Manchester City have Ederson. So if you press high, he's pinging the ball to the centre forwards. And suddenly Tottenham had 4 people out of the game. So you can't do it. So it's all well and good everyone being negative about the lesser teams and saying, they're not taking them on. The top teams are not taking them on.
One of the other things there, the point about the kicking, obviously lots of complaints about the various challenges in that that City suffered, particularly the De Bruyne and Jesus injuries. Looks like De Bruyne is actually not going to be as badly injured as maybe was first feared, and Jesus is going to be out for a couple of months. There will be a ramping up of the physicality that Manchester City just have to get used to from the other teams. And it's funny, we haven't actually seen that much of it so far. Is this a template and nobody's called it?
Yeah, we have. Everyone's talking about that punch and tackle. That's him just trying to stop a counter attack. It looks bad, but go back to Harry Kane's tackle on Sterling. It's disgusting. Go back to Ali's tackle on De Bruyne. they're dreadful. And because they're the media darlings, Harry Kane, nothing really been made of it. Go and watch them tackles. They are horrendous. Jacob Murphy as well done it to De Bruyne in the Newcastle game where he's led and stamped down. And they're the type of tackles. And I agree 100% with Pep Guardiola, because I've been in teams where you try and even it up by having a bit of physicality about it. But there's a difference between crashing into people and making career-threatening tackles. And we've seen the likes of Ashley Young. We've seen other guys now getting 3 match bans, the likes of Tarkowski at Burnley, just for little off-the-ball incidents. But there's no retrospective actions for those type of tackles that ultimately will end the player's career. I've seen it. I had young Colin Healy at Sunderland with us, who had a massive future ahead of him for Ireland. He had his leg broken in a stamp-down challenge in the game against Coventry. He never really hit the heights after that. So I agree 100% with Guardiola. The type of tackles that have gone in have been shocking against Manchester City.
Okay, so, right, there has already been a campaign, you think, from...
Yeah, listen, Guardiola... Well, it's a natural thought process is that you can't take them on football. So you want to enforce your physicality on them and stuff like that. But there's a fine line between that. I mean, I was quite a physical player. I was into that and I enjoyed all that. But there's a difference between that stamped down challenge that breaks people's legs. And I've seen too much of it in the last 5 or 6 weeks against Manchester City. Those tackles that I named. And listen, Harry Kane, I mean, I'm a massive fan of Harry Kane's and he's broke this Alan Shearer record. It's incredible. But the reality is he shouldn't have had the opportunity. He should have had a 3 match ban for that tackle because that was horrendous.
A problem with that as well, though, Gary, is that a lot of these challenges, and I think the Harry Kane one included, if I recall correctly, was just given as a yellow card. And this rule about once action has been taken, we don't want to embarrass the referee. It's a joke, really, isn't it?
It's an absolute nonsense because for that very reason, I never want to see the physical aspect taken out of the game. I never want it to see the way Wenger wants it to be total football. I don't want to see that. And invariably, when you go to Arsenal, as much as the brilliant football they've seen, you get a massive reaction from the crowds when they just make tackles, those Arsenal players. So I want to protect that part of the Premier League because it's a brilliant viewing point to see the physicality of it. But some of the tackles, as you rightly said, and that is the biggest nonsense, that retrospective action, because just because you've been booked is irrelevant. That is what the referee saw on that split moment. He decides it's a yellow. But as soon as he goes back and sees that video footage, if he'd have seen it in that context, there's no doubt he'd have done a 3 match ban straight away. And they have to address that.
Surely they can fix that. It's as easy as that, as let the referee relitigate it when he actually has a look at it. Got to talk to you about Virgil van Dijk and his arrival at Liverpool. Obviously, the 2 centre-backs combined to score a late winner against Burnley. Almost like competition has immediately improved their performances. Is this a great signing for Liverpool, and will they actually get the best from Van Dijk if they continue with the way that they've set their team up so far this season and last under Klopp?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant signing. My only concern was it the Van Dijk that we've seen this season? And I looked at the scenario and is the fact that he really was poor at Southampton. And even Klopp said he's had a bad first half of the season. I think that might be a case of recovering from his long-term knee injury, a bit of a loss of focus, or ultimately a poor attitude in the fact that he was literally down tools. But certainly, if I was to identify as a remit for a centre-half to play in Klopp's Liverpool team, it's him. It's the fact that we talked about the lesser teams just going long against Liverpool to miss out that high press. So you need a commanding physical presence. He's that. You talk about a centre-half who's comfortable being dragged into full-back positions because Liverpool like to get those full-backs in advanced positions. He's comfortable doing that, as top modern centre-halves have to be. He's good on the ball. He's a physical presence at set pieces. So he ticks all those boxes. The only concern I would say is that people are billing him as a leader. I don't think he's that. I think he will lead more through his own personal performances as opposed to cajoling, getting people around him, dominating a vocal player like a Jamie Carragher. I don't think he's that, but I think it's a brilliant signing. And the only concern is that he has to hit the ground running, because the way that Liverpool have handled this situation, the fact that they pay him £25 million more than they did in the summer, it's been a complete mess. They got reported for an illegal approach. Whoever the hierarchy was in doing that deal has made a complete mess of it. So it puts massive pressure not only on Van Dijk to justify his fee, but also the Liverpool board, but also Klopp, for the very fact he's put all his eggs in one basket to say, and I agreed with that at the time, that he didn't want to go and get a lesser centre-half. He wanted to get Van Dijk. But it does bode well for Liverpool. Keita's coming in the summer. I know Coutinho probably looks like he's going, but Lallana's coming back in from injury. It really looks good for Liverpool, and I expect them to really challenge now to be the best of the rest, because obviously City have run away with the league this season.
Do you subscribe to the idea, Gary, that I think it was Aidan O'Hara making the point in the Irish Independent yesterday that Van Dijk's reputation has been based on his performances against the top six in that Southampton season 2 years ago, I think, whenever they finished sixth, that potentially we watched a lot of his games in full on a Sunday when they're playing against the big teams, and like the facts show that Southampton just weren't as good, or Van Dijk wasn't putting in these barnstorming performances as much against lesser opposition. Obviously that's going to happen a lot more against Liverpool when they're going to have a bit more of the ball. That potentially just not having as much possession against the big teams in Southampton, which is when he was in the limelight, was essentially what Van Dijk has been signed for, and there might be another side to him that potentially even Jurgen Klopp himself isn't even aware of.
Well, there is a weakness, and you're right to point that out, Owen. And ultimately, it boils down to the fact that his lack of concentration. That's the weakness in his game. That when it's easy, he switches off. Even his coaches in said that the game is so talented, but he just gets into bad habits. And he certainly had when he came down from Celtic in terms of how dominant Celtic would be on the ball up in the Scottish League. So when he came down to the Premiership initially, he'd take too long to get into good defensive positions because he felt that they'd keep the ball. In the Premier League, you're going to be opened up as soon as you don't get into early positions. But I think he will improve. I think Klopp will probably identify that. And I just feel that he is the perfect centre-half to play for Klopp's system in terms of his pace. He's good on the ball. And a lot of the teams now will sit deep against Liverpool because they don't want any space in behind for the likes of Mane, Salah. So that invariably means that centre-halves will get a lot of ball. They might often be playmakers. And when he does step into midfield, he can break lines, he can hit good diagonal passes. But even if he gets within shooting range, he's got a great strike on him. So I am hoping that he is the type of centre-half who will fulfil his potential, and he'll have to be. But if he can do, then I think they've got a brilliant signing.
Gary, great stuff. Happy New Year to you.
And to you guys, thank you.
Thanks a million. It's Gary Breen with us there on Skype this morning. It's hard to know with Van Dijk. It would have been great to see if they could have got Van Dijk in the summer and had him and Coutinho in the same team, just to see where they'd be at this stage. Because they definitely just need that little bit of depth that every time one of their players goes out injured, it's not a calamity. The way it'll be interesting to see what happens with no De Bruyne and no Gabriel Jesus for the next couple of weeks. From a Manchester City perspective, you would expect them to be able to ride that out, and certainly it's not going to damage their ability to win the league, but just to continue with the run they're on. Whereas with Liverpool, you think that no Coutinho, like if then somebody else goes out, which undoubtedly they will, what happens at that point, and how good is that attacking trio up the top? That's the thing. The one thing that's going to be really annoying though is just the repetition of the transfer fee, and it's like, oh, Jurgen Klopp bought a defender for £75 million or whatever. Like, first of all, the fact that it got to 75 million isn't really Klopp's fault, as Gary pointed out there. It has to do with the fact that they completely screwed up the summer approach, but also, does a transfer fee even matter anymore? No. Like, who cares? Largely irrelevant. If 75 million is anything more than a drop in the ocean to you, then you should not be owning a top 6 Premier League club. You don't have enough money. Yeah, no, I agree with you. The money doesn't matter. It hasn't mattered. It hasn't mattered for about a decade. Since Abramovich came, all it did was mean that one team has more, and then once the money came from the Gulf, well, sure, it's all pretty much equal at this point. Happy New Year to Gareth Clancy, Ronan McLaughlin, Jimmy Clark, Paul Conlon, Andy Dunleavy and Patrick Delahunt, who said Happy New Year to us on our Facebook page. So thanks very much for that. Gareth Clancy pointing out that we're doing great work on all platforms. Thanks very much. We are indeed on many platforms. We're on radio, we're on YouTube, Facebook, and of course we're on Twitter. So make sure you follow, like and subscribe to all our various social accounts so you never miss anything. Patrick Delahunt says up the Villa, 5-0 win last night. Scott Hogan scored, and Jack Grealish has become a man. Hashtag on the plane. Some tweets as well. Paul O'Connell, not that Paul O'Connell, I don't think, no, says, I'm with Jar, skillful game but never qualified it as a sport. This is darts. I mean, it's just hard to get behind somebody becoming world champion who last year was just an amateur. In a year he's gone. How is that hard to get behind? That is an unbelievably accessible rags to riches story. It means that the level is wide but not very deep. I would disagree with you wholeheartedly. Like, he's had a meteoric rise. He was an excellent darts player this time last year. He just wasn't on the platform. He was a 20 seed. Tommy says Leicester won the league from nowhere. It's exactly the same as that. It's not quite the same as that. Not quite, to be honest. Well,
I don't know. I'll have to do a bit more reading into the backstory of Robbie Cross here.
Well, hang on. He's an electrician and he just won 400
Yeah, but I mean,
that's
I'm
all
talking
you need
about
to
his
know.
darts career prior in 2016, basically. I like the way as well. The other thing I noticed about Robbie Cross was that he started the competition as Robert Cross, and then they got to know him a little bit more, and he was Rob Cross come to semi-finals, and then the final, Wayne Mardle just screaming out, "Go on, Robbie Cross!" So the evolution of the name has been an interesting one. We'll see how that turns out. Voltage Robbie Cross in the Premier League darts.
On Wenger, sorry, not on Wenger, on Jose, but somebody whose Twitter name is Wenger's Wonga. He's going to be gone by the end of the season. This is Jose. He never had the stomach for a fight. When he's top of the league, he's Billy Big Balls. Otherwise, he's a butler. Good riddance. He stuck around long enough at Real Madrid to against Pep to just be able to get back to a position where they were at least competing. So I would expect him to stick around for at least the start of next season. But mark my words, if Man City get out to a winning 10 of their first 11 games next season, you can easily see a situation where Jose manufactures some kind of situation and decides, right, no, had enough. Some breaking news: Andy Murray is withdrawing from the Brisbane International because of issues with the long-term injury to his right hip. He hasn't played since last July. The Australian Open starts in Melbourne on the 15th of January. And so it looks like he is now in significant doubt for the Australian Open. I don't feel I'm where I need to be just yet to compete at the highest level. So with just a week to go, 2 weeks to go really, from yesterday to the start of the Australian Open, it'd be a surprise if he manages to make it in, which is a pity because the Australian Open last year gave us some of the best stories of the year. Nadal and Federer, obviously, in that epic Who Could Forget final.
Yeah, exactly. How could you possibly forget? Years from now, we'll still be bringing it up in the crappy quiz, and it'll be ding, ding, ding all the way because you can't possibly get that one incorrect.
No. About parents on the sidelines, the biggest problem I ever had coaching primary school football teams was parents shouting instructions and abuse from the sideline that contradicted what we were coaching the children. It causes confusion and upset for young players and turns them off the game. I have to say, anytime that we ever cover the issue of parents on the sidelines, we get an absolutely massive response to it. So we might come back to it a little bit later on this week.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It is a whole completely different layer, and the real issues that are being raised are real issues, and I'm not trying to trivialise the subject, but certainly when we were playing underage football and stuff, you'd come up against a team that you would play regularly, and part of that is like, oh God, that parent's going to be on the sideline for that team. And I'm not going to say what we would call some of the parents, but it's there was actually one incident where one of my teammates got so pissed off at one of the mothers on the sideline, he just turned around and kicked the ball in that direction and stormed off the field.
At her?
Yeah, and it was like a regular occurring opponent that we had. And
was she giving out about you guys or about her own team?
No, about the opponent, calling him every word under the sun. This could have been this was under 16 max.
She was giving out about her son?
No, sorry, the opponent, the guy who was marking her son.
Okay, right.
And it was kind of like, she almost had pet hate nicknames for this guy. We'd come up against him so many times, and it was just rivalry versus the parents, not just against the players, which is completely ridiculous. But as I say, it is an actual, I suppose that it's not trivialising the subject that much, because that's actually a pretty grim story now that I think about it, that a guy, a young teenager would get so annoyed, would just turn, kick a ball at a parent and storm off the field.
Where was she from?
Go on. Well, we're well aware of the place in Kerry called Guineaguilla.
Oh yeah,
notorious. No, I don't want to tire all Guineaguilla parents with the one brush.
All right,
but one in particular got the better of us. Our fuse was lit.
Guineaguilla is on the Cork border.
That's it. That's exactly the reason why it's close to Cork. We blame Cork on that. Half of them are from Cork.
Probably a blow in from Cork. Right, on that bombshell, Owen has slandered the entire town of Guineaguilla.
More townland.
We'll go down and do an old OB from Guineaguilla. We did a legendary OB from there back in the day. It's one of the first ones on a Friday night where we just sat and drank pints and made reasonable radio. It was a great idea. We could do it for breakfast sometime. Yeah, Tommy's nodding. Yeah, pints at breakfast. It's our New Year's resolution. Any New Year's resolutions?
Watch more darts, watch Premier League darts really, and follow this thing year round. See where the next Robbie Cross is coming from. I wonder where he is now. Probably
in a pub drinking pints.
Probably is, yeah.
That's where all his best practice is done.
Yeah, 9:15 in the morning. No better way to start your career.
Yeah, no, mine is to talk a little less shit, but obviously I've broken that in the first day. So there you go. Subscribe, follow, like, tell all your mates. It's Off the Ball AM. It's with you every morning at 7:45. We'll see you tomorrow. Good luck.